Good evening, all. I'm Suki. Welcome to I'mPossible Conversation, where ordinary people share their life journey. I'm delighted to have Ruth Polden as my guest tonight. Movement specialist, life learner in pursuit of wonderment. Welcome, Ruth.
Hi, thanks, Suki. Thanks so much for having me here.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about this and curious to see where we go.
Fantastic, because I am very excited too. So let's start.
Great.
As a child, you were always dancing. You dreamed of being a gorgeous ballerina and then lost in music. Tell me, please, about yourself. What were you like when you were little? What inspired you to become a dancer? Perhaps your mom?
Well, my mother was always dancing at home in the kitchen, and we used to sing a lot, yeah, dance was just a very playful part of living at home, actually, when we were very little. And I think she sent me to dance classes from quite a young age. I think I must have been about 4 when I first went. And I loved the idea of performing. We used to put on lots of sort of shows at home, just for my parents. I've got a brother and two sisters, and I loved performing, and I loved dancing and sort of losing myself in music. And that fantasy of being a beautiful ballerina. We used to go to see the ballet a lot, and that was something I just thought, that's what I want to do.
Excellent. So tell me about your mom, because I've read a little bit about your mom from your website.
Yes. So my mother, Margie Polden, she passed more than 20 years ago, and very, very suddenly. But she was a very vibrant force, and she was a physiotherapist, and she worked in the realm of women's health. So as children, we grew up hearing about women's anatomy. I mean, it was just normal for us, and I thought that's what happened in everyone's houses. And my mother was an extraordinary woman. She she spoke the language of the medical profession, the doctors, and the consultants, but also the language of the people that she was supporting and working with, predominantly women and their families. And so she was this wonderful bridge between those two worlds. And she was a real pioneer in wanting to create choice and options for women during pregnancy, birth, and also afterwards. So that was very much alive in our house, and in some way also inspired me in some way to go on to do some of the work that I did. And my mother was really quite well known in her field. She wrote quite a few books, and one of her books was used as a textbook for physiotherapists in their training, and she used to write for magazines, and they'd have her on as an expert on television, and she became, quite a force in her field. And yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So could you tell me about yourself as well, Sim, please? So the journey to become a dancer and then till now?
So, as you said, I very much dreamed of being a classical ballerina. And when I was 13, I went to the Royal Ballet to audition to try to get into the school. And it was pretty much there and then that I was told that I would never be a ballerina because physically my shape was wrong. I was never going to have the right shape. I was never going to be the right size. I didn't have the right look. We went through part of the process of being accepted also involved a lot of physical examinations, and they would determine, what we would be look like, post puberty, because at the time it was really important that they had this sort of uniformity of look in the corps de ballet. You couldn't have people that, looked different. So I was pretty much told that I wasn't, going to make it. And that was devastating for me because that was my whole little fantasy, that had fueled me, just crumbled. And I went through a period of saying, well, if I can't be a classical ballet dancer, I don't want to dance. And I stopped dancing for a little bit. But, I had this yearning. And I did dance. I went back to actually contemporary dance. And that's when it all sort of took off for me again. And I realized that actually there were other possibilities. And so I set upon training and refining my skills. And it was really quite competitive. And this was, nearly 40 years ago now. So it was a very different time, and we had the belief that in order to get on in that field, in order to be seen, in order to be of value, to be worth something, it required a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, emotional discomfort, physical discomfort. And it was about just being able to deliver what you were asked to do. So it was all about trying to be very virtuoso and get your body to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but through a lot of force. So there was very much the mindset, there is no gain without pain. And that's what I believed. And I spent, as did many of my colleagues at the time, we spent a lot of time injured and dancing injured.
Yeah.
Because I did go on to dance, I did go on to perform professionally, and it was extraordinary and wonderful. And when I look at it now, there was a lot that I accepted as being normal that I think nowadays I would not. I wouldn't, and there was a lot of shaming and being told that, things weren't good enough. And I'm not quite sure if that is an environment in which people can really flourish and grow into who they are and to bring their gifts forwards. But it was a very different time. I'm not suggesting that that's what goes on today.
Yeah, that's very interesting because that's probably the most disciplined field, the ballet, and then being a dancer, isn't it?
Yes, I mean it's a big commitment, and it becomes, you know, you live and breathe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a total existence. And you know, and in the same way as athletes train and prepare for, you know, events, it was no different. And I think today in companies, professional companies, I think you know, there is a very different approach to, you know, how things were about 40 years ago. But you know, it was you know, we had to keep ourselves looking a certain way. You know, you couldn't be putting on weight. Yeah. There was all of that going on, and I think for myself personally, it reached a certain point where I started to slightly step back from sort of more of a conventional approach to dancing and moving, and started to become a little bit more interested in less interested in the external look of what we were doing or trying to achieve. And I started to become more interested actually in more of an internal experience, and just where movement might initiate from. And also, to be honest, I started to get a little bit tired in going to watch performances and to see that so much of it looked a bit like acrobatics. And I was sort of looking for much more of a human experience.
Yeah, because that was
performance.
yeah. So now you teach yoga and also a movement specialist. What made you move from dancing? What was the turning point?
The turning point was gradual, because I was still performing actually when I was about 4 months pregnant with my daughter. I have 2 children, but then you know, as my pregnancy progressed, it didn't feel appropriate. And it was at that time that I had also started to become interested in yoga. And, you know, as part of this exploration to find a slightly different focus on moving in a possibly a more embodied way, I think, really. Yoga during my pregnancy was a very, very big anchor. And it was through that and through my own pregnancy actually, that I really became inspired to work. Initially, the yoga training that I did initially was focused on pregnancy. I did a very, very extensive training. It was a 2-year training, which, you know, nowadays is quite hard to find. That's how I started. For me, you know, before I came to what I'm doing now, through my personal journey into motherhood and through motherhood, I felt very, very, very strongly that, you know, being a mother, being a parent is one of the most important things we possibly do. It's one of the most important jobs in the world, and it isn't easy. It is not easy. And we're all finding our way through it. You know, there isn't one way. There isn't one way to, mother or parent a child. But it has to be real and honest, and that's going to be different for everybody. So, and we are living in a time where, you know, we've got so many amazing books, as you can see here. There are lots of wonderful books, and there's some, you know, people that have written extraordinary things, brought a lot of wisdom to what they do. And we are also very much wanting to be told, how do I do this? You know, how can I learn? How can I, you know, tell me what I need to do? And being a parent, you know, there is no recipe. There isn't a manual. There isn't. There are lots of useful suggestions. There are lots of interesting approaches, but ultimately, each person has to really sit and choose. You know, what resonates with me, what's going to work in my home, in my family. You know, what is, you know, what's true to my heart, not what am I doing because, you know, I've read in a book, this is, I mean, you can do it, you can try it, but if it isn't really something that's truly aligned with you and your personal truth or whatever it might be, it's not going to work.
Yeah, so that's where all this unconventional way of learning comes in.
Well, I think, well, for me, you know, life is about learning. And sometimes it can be, you know, life has an extraordinary way of bringing forwards, you know, things that are opportunities for learning. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, we don't go through life necessarily in the way we imagine we're going to go through life. You know, life brings lots of challenges, you know, to each one of us. So it's not that life is, you know, is without that, of course, but within that there's huge opportunity, and you know, being a parent is massive on that level. You know, because children come into the world and we want them to be safe, and we want everything to just go smoothly and easily for them. You know, they fall over, we want to pick them up and make sure that they're okay, and you know, and their safety and well-being is paramount. And then, you know, they start to grow and they go out into the world, and there comes a point when actually they need to go out in the world, and sometimes it's hard to let them go out into the world. You know? My youngest is nearly 21, and he's constantly reminding me that he's okay and he's got it, and I can let him. I can let him go.
Yeah. I recently watched a documentary called Becoming You, and that documented the children from birth, like their first 2,000 days, and like from start, like bring their heads up until crawling and walking and all sorts. So, and they, like when they tried to walk, there was lots of falling, but they still kept doing their own way, and that's their way of learning, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
So I remember you talk about notion of falling as well. So could you tell us a bit more on that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that very much sort of segues from what I was just mentioning about children and wanting to protect them and wanting them to just, you know, be safe and well and not meet any discomfort or pain or challenge or frustration. And there's something that's just not realistic about that, because in terms of development and our you know, as you say, when a baby is born, and that in itself is miraculous and extraordinary. And with all the knowledge that we have and all the technological know-how, and there's no question this is the safest time to be giving birth and bringing children into the world. And there is still, huge mystery about that. But it'd be wonderful to be able to get into the mind of a baby, but first of all, newborn babies come into the world. Yes, they are on some level totally dependent, but they come into the world with an innate ability and drive to learn and to be able to, over the first year of life, the amount of development and change that goes on is extraordinary. And that's learning. Babies don't, from one minute to the next, suddenly sit up and then suddenly stand up and then suddenly walk. There's so much preparing. There's so much exploration. There's so much that goes on. And if you sit back and observe a little one who, if you look at it, it might look as if it's lying on its back, it's not doing a whole load and it's not quite able to turn over, but you will watch over time how movement that starts off very, very random becomes more and more refined, and then and then babies start to explore sort of weight shifting of weight, and they get that exploration, and that will sort of slowly take them into rolling. Initially, when a baby rolls over for the first time, it's not because they've made that decision, but through some of the exploration that they're doing, it just happens. And then it might take a while for them, through trial and error, lots of different ways, to go back to being able to roll, but roll as a conscious decision and choice. And then, when a baby spends time on its stomach and on its front, it's also has to then from there start to develop a lot of the musculature that is needed to be able to lift its head and support its head. And a baby's head is proportionally much, much bigger than our heads are. And that's hard work. But for the baby to be able to lift its head, that is then preparing the baby to come into an upright orientation in space, to be able to sit, or to be able to come onto all fours and look around, or to be able to go from sitting to standing. So all of these stages feed into the next one. And so part of that means trying and not succeeding, means trying to stand up and falling over. But that's part of the exploration, and sometimes it brings a frustration. So as parents, we rush in and we say, "Oh, I can see you want to sit down. I'll sit you down." And of course, the baby saying, "Oh, this is great. I can sit here and I can look around, and I've got much more. I can see my surroundings, and I'm feeling different in the world." But they don't necessarily know how they got there, because they didn't get there themselves. And part of being able to move into a certain way of being, if it's sitting, also involves being able to come out of it. And that's really important learning. So, as parents, and of course I did the same with my daughter. I could see she wanted to sit up, so I would just sit her up. But then there'd be a time when she was already tired and she didn't quite know how to come out of sitting. And the only way to come out of sitting was to fall on her back. And then that would be, because her head was already heavy. But if children learn through trial and error, and there are ways to help support them in that, how they can move into sitting, they will use how they move in to also move out. They reverse things very, very, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing about development and developmental movement is something that stays with us for life. And it's very, very useful to go back and use in different forms. Actually, it's really useful to use when you work with somebody who is, say, recovering from an injury or has had, a stroke. It taps into a real, what can I say? Just a very sort of basic place in us that is a sort of a foundational place. And a lot of what came later and afterwards is built on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing about learning and learning to learn, if you watch a little one
Mm-hmm.
during the first, 2 years of their life, it is quite extraordinary. It's really inspirational, actually. And a lot of what they're doing is through exploration. It's through curiosity. It has nothing to do with getting something right or wrong. That comes later, and mostly it becomes instilled by, how we become socialized.
Mm-hmm.
But in its essence, that learning it is driven by a wonderful desire and an innate intelligence that we each embody.
Yeah, so it is quite interesting because the children, when they fall, they just get up. The adults, they tend not to go there again.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about it?
Yes, that's right. The children, when they're very little, when they're learning to come to standing or to come to sitting, they don't have a fear of falling. If they find their way in and find their way out. But for us as adults, first of all, for many of us, for most of us, we lose, we become habitualized in how we move. And we spend many, many hours in the day. Most of us would be sitting. We might be in front of a screen. Obviously there are people whose work is physical in nature. However, we repeat the same sort of activity. So our movement vocabulary and our options actually becomes fairly habitualized, and we do things in certain ways. So we brush our teeth with the same hand. We cut our food in the same way. And that's kind of what happens. And so when we are, and for most of us, we're not spending our days, going down to the floor, coming up again, changing levels, trying out new things where potentially we might be losing our balance and having to sort of, So falling for us becomes a big deal, and it becomes something we try to avoid. But what's interesting is if you are training in martial arts or training in certain skill sets, also people who are doing this bouldering where they're climbing up walls inside, they have to learn how to fall, because ultimately a lot of the time they will fall, and it's part of the process. So they are learning how to fall in a way that is not going to cause them injury. So, but for most of us, we don't have that experience. So falling becomes something that we become fearful of. And just as a personal story and reflection, during the first lockdown, I would go on, well, I love to walk, and I would try most mornings to get up very early, 6 o'clock, and be out and walk for a couple of hours. And I live in an area where I'm very lucky with lots of beautiful places to walk in and to perhaps not meet anybody, which I like. And I was walking, and there were some days when it had rained and the ground was more slippery, or it was icy, or I might just not have paid attention and I tripped over a tree stump or whatever, or the roots of a tree. Anyway, there were on quite a few occasions I fell. And the very first time that happened, as I was falling, I felt that I was sort of engulfed with fear, because I knew I was going to hit the ground and I was frightened I was going to hurt myself. And I actually landed quite badly on my knees. And for a split second, I thought, oh, what? I knew I was going to go back home and I was going to be teaching. And that was my first thought. Oh no, am I going to be able to walk back home? Am I going to be able to then? I quickly realized that I was okay. But what stayed with me was the sort of ripples of that fear of I'm falling and that means I'm going to hurt myself. And actually I was okay. But what happened after that was that I actually started to think, well, I'm out, I'm walking, it's going to happen. There are going to be times when I'm going to slip. There's going to be times, that's part of it. And I started to get interested about it and more curious around it. And I noticed that on the occasions that I was slipping, or I brought a different sense of curiosity to it. And there were other times when I did fall, but I noticed that each time I fell, I was a little more relaxed about falling. And also I did some extra things for myself around falling, and played with the idea of falling and different ways that you can fall. And what I noticed as I was falling in a safe way, not.
Yeah.
So it became a learning experience and an opportunity to try new things.
So it's kind of very interesting. We're talking about learning, and then sometimes we need to unlearn as well. What's your thought about that?
Most definitely. For me, the unlearning is more around the belief about what learning is about, and that how we learn. So I through the work that I've been doing over the years, that there is that sense of learning means you get something right or you get something wrong. You get a high grade or you get a low grade. And I think that's a very narrow part of what learning, could be about. For me, learning is about noticing. It's about developing and cultivating awareness. It's about deepening our understanding. It could be an understanding about, how what I do might be impacting on somebody else, or waking up to certain things in myself that I was previously unaware of. And it could be about a belief around how I believe I need to be if I'm sitting, or if, good posture, bad posture, that in itself, if we, let's just take posture, for instance, we have a sense of posture means sitting up and sitting straight and standing straight. And, I would say that that's a narrow way of looking at posture. And for me, posture is the way that we carry and organize ourselves to move. So it's not static.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but we think of it as static, and and for me, if we want to be resilient, and we want to be able to respond and go out into the world and act in the world and meet what life brings our way. If we are quite sort of stuck in how we look at things, we might we might find that we will be in for a big surprise. So for me, that it comes back to movement and moving, and we move through life, and learning is about moving and shifting and changing and developing. It could be how we perceive things, how we think about things, how we might think we know a lot about a certain area and subject, but something will always come along that will be new and will be fresh. And so that's where this whole thing about curiosity and learning through experience and meeting that sense of wonderment, because then we can stay more loose, more responsive. We don't get so stuck and so fixed and so locked in both how we hold and carry ourselves, but also in how we meet the world and our beliefs.
Yeah, so what's the first step to get there? I'm sure it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
But what would be for you, for example?
Well, I think it's such a personal journey and personal experience, and for everybody it will mean something quite different. I notice in myself that when I am able to almost step back and just stay curious about any given situation, that first of all helps to dissolve a little bit of fear that might come in if you're in a new situation. Being on a podcast is quite a new experience for me, and I felt very clearly that I just wanted to be just interested and open in what was going to happen when we kind of met today, rather than another way of approaching this could have been, well, I need to prepare some answers, I need to have and that might work for somebody, and there isn't one way to do this. But for myself, I know that if I can stay a little bit more open and interested and curious about a new situation, and the opportunity there is for me to learn something new or discover something new, that's always a good starting point.
Being curious.
Curiosity is very key. For me.
So, because you said movement brings me a joy. It's from your website. And and then you're talking about natural movement quite a lot. And then I've recently come across different videos on YouTube talking about body hacking, and they trying to accelerate things to bring in new, I wouldn't say technology, but different ways inventing to achieve something they want to achieve. What do you think about that?
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Okay, like for example, I've recently interviewed a guy called Colin, and he's a meditation teacher. And apparently some people are coming with new ideas. Instead of sitting down and meditating for 9 months to go into enlightenment, you can achieve it within like 2 weeks or in a week. So it is kind of a hacking and reducing the number of days you need to spend on it. So is there anything like that we could do in our body to achieve something like impossible? What do you think?
Look, we're most certainly living with a very different sense of immediacy. You know, the pace of life. You know, we're inundated with sort of WhatsApp messages, social media messages. You know, LinkedIn. Everybody's presenting themselves out into the world in lots of different ways and varied ways. And I think there's some extraordinary people doing wonderful work, you know, each one bringing their gifts into the world. And I can appreciate that the way we are sort of fed and socialized, you know, we want a quick and immediate change and a fix. And I'm sure there are certain things, and there are certain things that you can do that will immediately begin to start a shift and a change. But in terms of moving and movement and how we use our physicality and our bodies and how we function, if we've been functioning in that way for, you know, the last 30, 40, 60 years, you can begin to create an awareness around that, because most of our habitual ways of being are not conscious. We're not even aware of what we do and how we do it until something starts to hurt, say, for instance, or until, you know, we injure ourselves and we can't do things that we take for granted, you know, for instance. Or we lose function for whatever reason. So in terms of creating an awareness or bringing in new opportunities or other possibilities of ways of moving, that's a process, because real learning is not done through somebody saying, this is the wrong way, this is the right way, now you've got to copy the right way, because then you'll be, you know, habitualizing yourself in another way. So and each person is organized differently. Each person has a different history, has different life experience, and that will impact also how they move, how they, you know, sit, how they meet the world, how they talk, how they use their eyes, you know, where their head is in relation to their pelvis, all sorts of things. So those things shift and change over time, not because you're being corrected, but because you have more options and possibilities. And then your nervous system makes the choice, because our nervous system will go for what is the least effortful, what makes the most sense for whatever function we want to be performing at any moment in time. And that brings me back to that piece about our innate intelligence. Our nervous system is hugely, hugely intelligent and evolved. And our brains love variation. They love variety. They love repetition with variety.
Right.
And that's what,
variety.
yeah. Because if you repeat, just in terms of movement, if you keep repeating the same movement, you'll get very good at that particular movement. But that you might be doing something in life where suddenly, you need to do it a bit differently. But, so of course, that's a very simplistic example.
Yeah.
But repetition with variety is what gets the brain interested. And that's what also helps to develop and create more neural pathways, new connections in the brain. The brain, we now know much more about neuroplasticity, this huge ability that our brains have. The brain can change. It can change, its structure and function really through thought and activity.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is, let's all stay true to ourselves, and then our body will take care, because we know what's best for us without even pushing ourselves, I guess.
I think, I'm saying that we are very conditioned through the ways that we grow up, or we're socialized, or what might have happened to us in our life, and we believe sometimes we can have quite a narrow perception of ourselves and our abilities. And what we're good at and what we're not good at. And of course, I can't imagine that in this life I will become a marathon runner. I mean, that's my belief. But I can imagine if I started to, little by little, with small incremental steps, put my attention, and with a lot of support and help from people that could, that could help me with that, I'm sure that I would be able to embark on a journey that would take me perhaps some of the way. And maybe I would run a marathon, but my sense of myself is that I don't particularly like running very much. So, so that's just a little example of that we our possibilities often, or our belief in terms of what is possible, can get a little narrow. And by staying curious, by seeing sort of that by approaching something with a sense of wonderment, that sort of, in some ways, it sort of starts to diffuse some of that, oh, I'm not good at that, or I can't do that, which actually stops us from taking the next step.
Yeah.
And, who knows? Who knows? The other thing, in answer to something that you actually said, Saki, is that we have become quite numbed. We're quite numbed in terms of being able to sense and feel ourselves in many ways. So, and to be developing that sense of trust in what we intuitively might feel is going to be good for us or not good for us. You know, we because we're very often fed by external influences and what, you know, this latest craze is this, and, you know, there's this new book out and everyone's doing this technique and everybody. And for some people it can be absolutely the right thing, and for other people it can not be the right thing.
Yeah.
And so that that being able to sort of tune in and to have the opportunity just to notice ourselves. When we're so busy, we're all very, very busy, and sometimes, you know, we keep busy actually as a way of not noticing ourselves. So it, you know, learning for me is very, you know, far-reaching.
Yeah.
In so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to ask, you danced and then you've been lecturing at universities in Israel. So what's your connection with that? Because I felt like you have quite a lot. Have you lived there quite long, or have you been there? Yeah.
Yes, I lived in Israel for 20 years, and my first husband was Israeli, and yeah, we met in England, but then I went to Israel. I actually completed part of my dance training in Israel at the Academy of Music and Dance, and that was you know, a fascinating experience. And yes, and then I lived in Israel for 20 years, and I spent a fair amount of my career as a professional dancer performing in Israel.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Because right.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yes. So it was you know, a very wonderful time, very rich. You know, I have a lot of dear friends who are, you know, live in Israel, and I have a lot of love for the country, and a lot of sadness for you know, also what is going on. And sadness in a way that I think when people think about Israel, you know, they will think about very specific things, and you know, which is certainly an element, but it's not the whole story. Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. So I usually ask like a few questions to know about you a bit more. You are a very good cook, aren't you? What's your most favorite dish?
Oh well, I love cooking. I think it's most certainly for me it's Middle Eastern stroke Mediterranean cooking. I just love the idea of having friends and family and gathering around a table and sharing around food. I can't think of a particular dish right now. I mean, I've just made some baba ganoush, so that sort of stayed in my mind. That's yeah. But yeah, that's I love food.
So what makes you laugh out loud?
Well, humor. I love, you know, people who have a great sense of humor, of course. I have to say that children, little children and babies, I mean, they're just, that the delight that they spark is quite extraordinary. Yeah. I find myself very often, if I'm out, and I see just sort of a little one, I will always be drawn to just observe for a moment, because there's always just so much you can get sucked into, just observing and what they're doing and how they're exploring wherever they might be, at that moment in time. So, yeah.
They are very curious, aren't they? And looking at it from a grown-up's view, like everything they do, they have just their own way of doing things.
Yes, their way, not necessarily our way. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, right. So what book are you reading at the moment? Are you a reader? Like, do you read a lot? Because I can see so many books behind you.
Yes. Yes, these books are mostly sort of professional books, but I'm reading. I'm currently reading a book written by Moshe Feldenkrais at the moment. It's not, it's something that I'm rereading, and it's more of a book that's sort of fueling my learning and my professional development. But it's called The Potent Self. That's one that I'm currently reading.
Oh, wow. Fab. Right. I can't believe it's already 7:57. The time just flown by. So could you tell us, our viewers, where can people find you if they find out a bit more?
Yeah, so my website is ruthpolden.com. And that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. I am on Facebook and I am on LinkedIn as well. I'm sort of finding my way and learning my way through that. But if I'd be so happy if anyone wanted to get in touch or had any questions or any thoughts or feedback. It would be wonderful to hear from people. And also, Suki, I just wanted to thank you so much for this opportunity. I've so enjoyed being able to chat with you.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a delight to have you on I'mPossible Conversation. So what are you looking forward in 2021 most? That's probably my last question.
Well, I'm looking forward to, I think, reaching wider and farther and making more connections with people around the world, because currently in this sort of Zoom and virtual reality that we're in, that is so possible. People are coming to my classes who live, in Australia or, Germany or whatever. And so I love that the world feels on some level a little smaller, and that we really are all in it together.
Absolutely.
So that's something I'm looking forward to developing.
Fantastic. It's been so lovely to have you on I'mPossible Conversation. Thanks so much for your time, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everyone else joining us. And see you next week.